What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to Real Packers Talk, the podcast dedicated to everything green and gold. I am your host, Ethan Peltier. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Real Packers Talk. And I'm here today with my Week 7 reactions and analysis. This one is going to be a little bit more of a rant, a little bit unscripted. Normally I do write out everything in my notes and I plan it all out. But today I just felt like I needed to jump on and just discuss a bunch of thoughts, because there's a lot to discuss right now. This team is very flawed right now. There's something very wrong with this team, and I just wanted to go over the game briefly, share some thoughts, and kind of try and figure out what is the issue here. So without further ado, I'm going to just jump into it. The Packers ended up going out to Washington to fall 23-21 to the Commanders, the newly rebranded Commanders at that. And it was just an ugly game. There's really no other way to describe it than ugly. And no, I'm not just talking about the outcome of the game. I'm talking about every phase of the game. Every aspect was ugly, for the Packers at least. Our offense could not get going whatsoever. They scored twice, 2 touchdowns, and I'll get more into that later. Although defense had a nice start to the game, the more time that went on, it was very obvious that they were gassed and that they were not put in very good positions. And then special teams had an ugly day. We had a muffed punt that turned into a field goal for Washington. Just not good execution at all 3 levels, all 3 phases. It was hard to watch, and it's like, again, something I brought up on this podcast before. It's not like there's a lack of talent on this roster. It just feels like there's a lack of execution and a lack of desire. Now, these are all things I'm going to go more in depth on as the episode goes on. But, sitting at 3-4 at this part of the season, I feel like is really shocking for a lot of us Packers fans. So, again, while I don't want to sit over here and just say, we need to panic, press the panic button, I don't know. Maybe we do. I said in my last episode that I definitely think that expectations need to be kind of toned down a little bit. I just don't know if this team has it in them to be able to respond. It just does not seem like they can respond to adversity very well, which is a problem. You're not going to win very many games in the NFL if you cannot, play against adversity. I'll tell you that much. So even though this is going to be a little bit more of an unscripted episode, I do want to briefly go over some of the stats from this game, starting with the Packers. Aaron Rodgers went 23 for 35, throwing for 194 yards and 2 touchdowns, one of which was to Aaron Jones. Actually, both of them were to Aaron Jones, one on a little screen and then another one. Rodgers kind of rolled left. Late stage of the game, we were down 2 scores. The Commanders were basically playing prevent defense, and he just made a nice throw. Aaron Jones made a nice adjustment, and honestly, it was a good touchdown. But at that point in the game, it was too late. Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon combined for 12 carries. I'm just going to let that sit. 12 carries between the 2 of them. Now, I do know that, Aaron Jones had, I believe, 9 receptions in the air, so he had a total of, 17 touches? But 12 rushes, 12 carries from A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones combined. How is it that week after week we go, when we're looking at this team and we're trying to figure out what the strengths are, what should we lean into? How many times have we heard Matt LaFleur go up to the press, podium and say, I think we need to get the ball in Aaron Jones' hands more. We need to run the ball more. Then run the ball more. Is it... I'm trying to figure out, because the numbers just aren't adding up. And I know that it's a little bit more complicated, a little bit more nuanced than that. I've heard a lot of Packers fans kind of discussing online, well, if the Packers are a run-first team and they're going to run the ball a lot, teams are going to probably crack down on that. And it sounds like the teams that we're playing are essentially, daring us to throw the ball. But if that's not our strength, why are we not leaning into the run game? It doesn't quite make a whole lot of sense to me. I think 12 carries is simply too little. And I also understand that it can be hard to stick with the run game when it's not working. If you're only getting 2-3 yards a pop here and there, But that's why I advocate that you stick with it, right? If it's first down and you get 3 yards, 2nd and 7, you get 3 more yards. Now it's 3rd and 4, manageable. If you run the ball again and get another 3 yards, it's 4th and 1. That's a manageable conversion, right? I just don't understand why we run the ball twice and then just give up on it. We completely abandoned it. And I know that there were a couple runs that just didn't work out. There were runs that got blown up. I believe there was one play where Aaron Jones lost 5 yards on first down. I think that's more scheming than it is the actual method of attacking. It's like you're running the ball, but how are you running the ball? It's frustrating. So I'm gonna just stop with that rant because I can feel myself getting more and more into it, a little bit more heated. I just don't understand how you can look at the numbers, turn around and say we need to be better, we need to run the ball more, and then the next week do the same thing. Just makes no sense whatsoever. Continuing on with these offensive woes, I think the offensive line is really struggling right now. And part of that is to do with injury, part of that is to do with the lack of experience that we have on the offensive line. And those are all things that I expect to get cleaned up as the season goes on, but man, it is hard to do anything when your line just is not making blocks and they're not protecting your quarterback. So that also plays a big role in, the run game not working, the pass game not working. That's a big issue. Now, I felt like we played a lot better this last week against the Commanders than we did against the Jets. I thought Zach Tom, who got his first start over at left tackle, had a nice day. But it's just not good enough from what I'm seeing. Too many guys are getting blown off the line, and if you can't win in the trenches, it's going to be tough to win anything. So that's another issue. I know David Bakhtiari missed this last game. He apparently, according to reports, woke up on Saturday and just didn't feel like he was ready to go, so they listed him as a questionable, and he missed the game. Now, like I said, Zach Tom played real nicely, and I feel like this is more of a precautionary thing than anything, so I'm not terribly worried about David Bakhtiari specifically, but this whole offensive line, man, needs to get their stuff together ASAP. And then lastly, I want to touch on the passing game. Aaron Rodgers has not been on the mark this year, and I know there are going to be a lot of Packers fans who are going to light him on fire for that. They're going to hold him accountable, and I totally understand why. Call me a Rodgers apologist, if you will. I do think that he hasn't played well this season, but it's kind of hard to do that when, A, you're getting a lot of pressure in your face, B, you don't have receivers that you've developed a rapport and trust with, and C, just poor offensive scheming in general. It's just, look, man, it is ugly. This Packers offense has been one of the worst in the entire league so far this season, and it's just something needs to change really, really soon, or they're going to keep losing games. So those are just some of the issues with the offense, and that's the primary thing that I think is plaguing this team right now is the lack of offensive production, the lack of complementary football. Like I said earlier, the defense played okay. They played pretty decently, but again, when you keep getting put in bad situations, when your offense cannot drive down the field and sustain long drives, you're going to get worn out on defense, and that's exactly what happened. And the Commanders totally took advantage of that, and they did just enough to squeak by us. And that's something I wanted to shout out to them. I mean, shout out to the Commanders. They played not a great game, in my opinion, but they did what they needed to do. They did just enough, and I mean, with a backup quarterback and everything that they're dealing with right now, if you're a Commanders fan, you have to feel good about this win. You guys have gone through a lot of adversity this season. And, like I said, you got to give props where it's due. It's just frustrating when your team is on the losing end of that. Before I wrap up this episode with the good takeaways that I had from this game, I do want to briefly talk about the officiating. Because, man, this was, in my opinion, one of the worst officiated games I've seen in a minute. And for both sides, I mean, there were just weird calls for both sides. The Packers had a scoop and score touchdown taken away from them from a fair but albeit kind of weak defensive or illegal touching down the field, I believe was the call. Completely wiped away a touchdown for the Packers, which was a huge turning point in the game. There was a moment where the Packers challenged a fumble, and upon first look, it didn't look very close. The second look, it looked a lot closer. Honestly, I felt like that call could have gone either way. They could have easily overturned that. But that ultimately wouldn't have affected the outcome of the game, if you ask me. I don't think Packers fans should blame the refs on this one. I think the Packers played really undisciplined football. They had a lot of holding calls. They shot themselves in the foot numerous times, and they paid for it. But the officiating was kind of questionable, just in general, and it really slowed the game down. The Packers game did not even end. I can't remember what time it started and what time it ended, but I can tell you for a fact that by the time we hit halftime, all the other, I think, noon games at the time had already hit like halfway through the third quarter. If games are being held up that long by officiating, I do think that's an issue. It definitely messed with the pacing of the game, and it's just not a feasible way to play football, at least from the Packers' perspective. Like I said, they played very undisciplined football. Just a weird game in general. So normally this would be the part of the podcast that I do the who's hot, who's not. And unfortunately, I just don't know if I can give the hot designation to anyone this week. I think I have to just say the Packers are just not hot right now. The entire team, coaching staff, offense, defense, special teams, it is ugly. This team is fundamentally flawed, and they really need to fix some things around. I know I've been complaining and kind of just ranting this whole episode, so to avoid sounding like a negative Nancy all the time, I am going to just briefly touch on the things that were good from this game. I thought, obviously Devondre Campbell's pick 6 was awesome. I was screaming my head off the entire way he was running down the field. It's nice to see us get a turnover. And then I also thought that Kingsley Enagbare had a nice day. He had a couple pressures and I believe a sack. So good on the rookie for getting in the backfield and making some plays. But there is really not a lot of good to take away from this game. And I really hope we can get this thing turned around. We've got a really, really tough test up ahead of us against the Buffalo Bills on the road, mind you. So I'm going to have to take a little bit of time to sit on this, think about it, look at the team, and I did want to also mention that I was not able to release a pregame episode for this against the Commanders this week. I had a really, really packed work week, so assuming that I can get some time off this week, I do plan on coming back out with another preview episode against the Bills, so there's that to look forward to. Maybe not, we'll see. But I am going to wrap it up there. I know that this has been more of a rant than it was an actual structured analysis and breakdown. You have to understand that as a Packers fan, I am really, really frustrated with just the last couple of weeks. There has been a serious lack of effort from the team, and it's hard to watch. But with that, I am going to wrap this all up. I cannot thank you all enough for taking the time to listen to this podcast. It truly means the world to me. I do want to remind you all that I am on Twitter and Instagram at Real Packers Talk. Feel free to shoot me a DM. Let's talk Packers football, or really football in general. I'd love to interact with you guys. It would really mean a lot to me. Before I let y'all go today, I do want to share some exciting news. This podcast has reached the threshold it needs to unlock ad sponsors. So I'm not exactly sure how that's all going to work out. I'm still kind of figuring out the little details myself. But there will be ads attached to my podcast now, moving forward. And like I said, I'm going to figure out how that all works. But I'm really excited about this. This is something that I've been thinking about doing for a long time. And finally being able to actually profit off of it is just absurd to me. Like, that's really cool. So once again, thank you. Thank you all so much. I really, really do appreciate it. I want to remind you all that you can find this podcast anywhere on Spotify, Anchor, and YouTube. Feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe, all those great things. Thanks again for listening. I'm going to leave y'all with that. With Go Pack Go. Peace.